Hey guys, welcome into another episode of From the Wing. I'm Christian Clark, the Pelicans beat writer for NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. I was on airline drive for exit interviews Tuesday. Definitely a lot to chew on. We heard from David Griffin, Willie Green, a bunch of the players. I think the one thing above all else I took away, change is coming on airline drive this year, and I don't think it's at the management level. I don't think David Griffin's going anywhere. I don't think it's the coaching level. I don't anticipate Willie Green going anywhere, but I do think this roster is going to look pretty different headed into the 2024-2025 season. David Griffin acknowledged we saw it. We saw what the starting five that we were trying to put on the floor for 1.5 years looked like this past season. There was a good sample size of minutes. And while the Pelicans had a very nice regular season, the starting lineup they put on the floor was not great. And I think, we're going to see a new starting five headed into next season. And I guess we'll see how much it changes.
Yeah, there were some lines in there that felt very pointed. We've talked about one of the positions that is an eventuality. Like, there is no starting center on the roster. As soon as this league year ends, they don't have a starting center. So there will be a new starting center that is like a virtual formality. How they go about that, who that ends up being, remains to be seen. And the verbiage that was used felt and kind of the rhythm of what we heard from other players felt very much like there was not a lot of placating and security given to very many people. Zion seemed very happy. Him and Herb seemed like the two most secure people in the building, and everybody else kind of like was kind of, maybe a little sullen about the end of the year and like how they performed. I don't think anybody was very happy with how they did in the series, but it was interesting to hear Larry, rip on we're all pawns in a chess game. And, sounded like somebody who's very prepared for changes to happen, but also sounds like, he would also be the guy that would say that thing.
We're all pawns in the game, man. In the game of life, we're ants.
We're ants under the magnifying glass. But the two key things from Griff, and are we going to get into the full quotes? Do you want to give the full quotes, or do I highlight the two snippets that felt the most important?
Well, I guess I'll set you up with this. I asked Griff very directly, CJ McCollum, Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, those guys are going to make $106 million next season. This is not traditionally a team that pays the luxury tax. You got outscored in your minutes with them. You were a net negative with your minutes. Can you run it back? David Griffin's quote was, "You certainly don't come at this as we're going to build around one of them. I think certainly anytime two of the three were on the court, we won those minutes. When three of them were on the court, we tended not to. That has a lot to do with what we support them with. Giving them the ancillary pieces that help them thrive. Knowing now, because we've seen the group enough, I think we'll be able to address some of that. But certainly we have to be open to a lot of different things."
So, two of the three on the court, we were pretty good. When all three were out there, tended not to be. Also, we put it out on the court for a good stretch of time, had some regrets about untimely injuries, but we saw enough. That very, it feels like innuendo that those three, the opening for those three to change is as wide as it's ever been.
Yes, I would agree with that statement. I don't think it's an inevitability that the big three changes, but I do think it is, for the first time, a possibility since they traded for CJ McCollum. I guess it was a possibility last summer when, frankly, I think they looked around at some Zion deals but didn't do them. But it is once again a possibility this summer.
Yeah, now we finally, the one fortunate thing that we can hang our hats on is that Zion started doing all of the professional things, and that everything we're seeing and hearing down to the last act he had on court, which was shaking the hands of everybody coming off the court before they went into the locker room, feels very much like a guy who this team now belongs to. And everything we're hearing certainly sounds like a team that belongs to the guy. And we kind of had our foot in both types of water here. We had it in the leftovers of 22-23, as well as the new waters of can Zion be the guy. Zion showed us a lot of I can be the guy. And now he's got to get the offseason right. But it feels very much like the focal point now in terms of all of your design and decision making is not to try to figure out how to tie the two together or how to tie the three together. It's how to make pieces work around him. And that's never quite been exactly the focus. It's been like, let's see what we have. And he made it clear that we have seen what we have. And there are two things that we've harped on a good bit that were choices that were made, at the end in the offseason and again at the deadline. We were short on ball handling. We are short on athleticism and depth at the center position. Those are choices that were made. There were price tags out there that were very, very high to change those things. They could have made a choice at those times. We opted not to. We rolled the ball out and we tried to do it with what we had. And this series felt like it shined a gargantuan spotlight at those two things. It just blazing heat of 1,000 suns, like literal ants under the magnifying glass. You don't have a center that can play in modern NBA matchups, and you do not have a point guard when Zion isn't taking up a lot of the initiation duties. And now it feels like we are going to confront those things. And it sounds like it's a real possibility that, if something comes along where BI is a part of that reconstruction, that door is now open.
It does feel like the time is right to better optimize the roster around Zion and really fit the pieces around him a little bit better than they have fit around him in the first 5 years. He's already played with 3 centers 5 years into his career. Derek Favors, Steven Adams, Jonas Valanciunas. Derek Favors was, to me, on the back nine of his career. I mean, he was almost at the end. He was just pretty close to being washed. Steven Adams, I think, still had some good basketball left, but it was a terrible fit at the time. And now when you look at Steven Adams, I mean, I think the injury stuff has kind of caught up with him. Jonas Valanciunas, it was not a bad fit to me. Jonas Valanciunas did a lot of very good things for the Pelicans. It was not ideal, but him and Zion, I think they made it work and it was pretty good. I just think, if you want to win playoff rounds, if you want to try to compete for a championship, you've probably got to try to do something different there. And I mean, if you're going to do that, you also need like a leap from Zion and to see him in the playoffs, obviously. But yeah, I just think it's time to try to get the right guy there. And I think the guard discussion is going to be, very interesting. Another thing I asked David Griffin point blank, because I get asked about it every single radio hit I do. Do the Pelicans need a point guard? I asked him that. I was like, what do you make of the Pelicans need a point guard discussion? He says, he basically was like, I don't think like there's that many pure point guards out there just in the NBA in general. But he's like, we do need more basketball IQ on the floor. He brought up the example of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is not a pure point guard, but he does a great job of getting them the best, most efficient shot on the floor every single time. And I thought that was fair, and I thought that was good.
Yeah, so there's actually a little bit of conversation going on about this right now in terms of like this era that we're in right now took a lot of chances on wings that could develop enough initiation. There's this belief that like you get the wing that can do everything, you win the game. And realistically, a lot of those shots have landed as like guys are actually you're a 2 or a 3 and you can't really handle the ball. And that's not going to be a part of your game to that degree. But when you have a team like the Thunder, like Shai does have some primary initiation and Jalen has primary initiation and they're both good and Giddey can do it too. And it's just, and there's one guy after another that can play in that role and they have enough. And they also had health. For us, so much of the contingency was finding out how much of the burden Zion could handle that there's no real starting point guard role in our primary rotation that actually makes sense with him and Brandon because they both play on the ball. And so like the dream here if you could just go wave a wand over anything, is that CJ is 3 years younger and 3 inches taller, or that your backup point guard Jose is 6'4". Then you would not have felt that in the way that you did just now in the OKC series. So it's more they were short on ball handling and primary initiation, and they knew it by design, and it just got shown to them over and over and over again. I think it's plainly clear that giving more responsibility to BI in that world is not a good idea, and that CJ moving up to initiator 1A or 1B is a terrible idea at this point in his career. And so
Brandon Ingram was begging them to go out and get a point guard. I mean,
never really heard that line from him before, but I think that was one of the interesting takeaways from this too, is hearing him say out loud, like, yeah, you remember when I shot those threes? It was pretty cool to catch those balls from point guards.
Yeah. I mean, Lonzo Ball, I had almost forgotten about you. It'd been a long time. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. He's like, would it help if they got a point guard? He's like, yeah, it absolutely would help me. And take more of those catch and shoot threes and get off the ball a little bit. I thought that was an interesting point. Adam, the Pelicans' performance against the Kings in the first round, it was not just bad offense. It was historically bad playoff offense. Like one of the worst offensive performances we've seen from any playoff team in like a decade. The Pelicans scored 92, 85, and 89 points. They averaged 93.5 points per 100 possessions. I went through all of it. That was the worst offensive rating by a playoff team since 2015-16, when there were like 3 teams with worse offensive ratings than that. Why was it? Explain to me why it was not just bad, but putrid offense.
So it's matchups and playoff arena matchups. So you get an OKC team that's really their only defined weakness, like true weakness, is big, like size in the paint, and you can potentially punish them in the paint and play out of that. The problem is everybody else they have is really athletic and long and spaces. So they don't really have like another weakness. So now you have to beat like one-on-one matchups. But you know who this matchup is terrible for? Small guards. And you know who we needed initiation from? Really small guards. So there, and then the thing that BI seems to struggle with the most when trying to create is a defender that can get up in him. And so Lou Dort got up in BI, and everybody that popped up in front of CJ caused him to dribble for 6 or 7 seconds before he could do anything. We couldn't beat a one-on-one matchup outside of Jonas Valanciunas. And it's because of the size and athleticism. Like, this is of Jalen plus SGA. I put Dort on you, and if you actually get me to switch, you get freak wing athlete to deal with. It's not good. It's a heinous matchup when you're short on ball handling. You need to be able to move those guys around, and like that's the unfortunate thing, and why I keep mentioning Jose and how sad it is that he's so small. That series, that matchup is screaming for him. It's screaming for a guy to probe and move around in space, to go take switches, to go force rotation with his dribble. And we don't have anybody else that can do that. And the only guy that can do that's 5'10". So he had a terrible series. We had a terrible series. We couldn't initiate anything. Every play was a dumpster fire. Steve Jones had a hilarious quote when Dunkerspot did the recap of Game 3 and talked about what might happen in Game 4. He said, New Orleans just kind of has to try to extend this thing. They really need to try and, do whatever they can to get the Thunder in rotation, and then see, like, what would it look like if we can get CJ and Trey to knock down a few shots? What would it look like? Indeed, the world will never know.
Yeah, I mean, I think CJ was 5 of 22 from 3 going into Game 4, finished the series 7 of 29. I mean, 24% from a guy who shot the heck out of it all year. Jose Alvarado was 1 of 14 from 3 in the series, 3 of 20 overall. Jose Alvarado who was an awesome bench player for the Pelicans in the regular season, made 3 field goals in the entire series. Brandon Ingram obviously gets most of the headlines here, and he should get most of the headlines, to be clear, because he, is a guy who's made an all-star game, and they've got to make a decision about his contract, and was so bad it was hard to look at. And frankly, game 4 was almost like a Starksian or Simmons-esque. And we should say that Brandon was coming back from, a knee injury, and he only looked right in like one of the 7 games that he played in after that. Like I think that absolutely went into it. But look, Brandon was awful. CJ was really bad. Jose really struggled. Who was anyone good in the series? Like Najee Marshall was okay. Was any Pelican good in the series?
I mean, Jonas gave you everything you could rationally expect from him. So, like, he wasn't good because Chet got him in, pick and roll and drives and kicked his ass, but he gave you every ounce of gas he had. Herb was bad offensively, so it kind of drags. Like, he was still good defensively. He was like the only person that was still consistently good defensively, but it kind of didn't matter. So yeah, it's tough to say anybody. Trey gave you a good game. Najee gave you a good game. Jonas, if you're being honest, gave you like one good game, and you never got a good game from BI, from CJ, and everybody else was inconsistent. So no, I wouldn't. Like, if you had to ask me to pick an MVP of the series for us, like painfully, I can't do it.
Brandon Ingram went 2-14 from the field in game 4. There was one play that's going to be burned into my brain forever. It was like 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Pelicans down 3. He's near the left block, and he's got Dort kind of pinned on his backside. And all he has to do is just jump up and shoot like this 6-footer right off the glass. And Chet is there, but he's far enough away where it's like, I don't think he can block the shot or anything. It's just the type of shot I've seen Brandon Ingram make 500 times in a Pelicans uniform. He pivots. He clearly doesn't want to take a shot. Finally jumps, skips it cross court to Najee Marshall, who throws up an air ball. I mean, it was just so clear in that moment. It was like, he doesn't want to shoot right now. I mean, he does not want to shoot. He's in his head right now. I mean, Brandon did not have a good series at all. But like game 4, I think, was kind of a new low in the series. And I mean, it was stunning. It was stunning to see him struggle to that degree. On our last episode, I think we outlined a lot of the reasons why, at least I thought that he struggled so much this year compared to 2 years ago when he was, really, really good in that first round series against the Suns. I thought it was better point of attack defender, from Dort versus Jay Crowder and Torrey Craig. And he did get a little bit of Mikal Bridges. When I tweeted this, I had people saying, "Oh, you're ignoring Mikal Bridges." But if you watch that series, or if you even like bothered to go and look at the tracking data, Mikal Bridges guarded him a little bit, but Mikal Bridges was the primary defender on CJ McCollum. So like, if you guys are going to tweet that at me, have a better memory or try to do your homework. And then I think the other big factor was Chet Holmgren is an incredible rim protector. I don't know if people realize how good Chet Holmgren is.
See, also in game 4, when Herb Jones gets a little ball away from the basket, has like 4 feet to go to put in a layup, and he chooses to go off the top of the glass from 3 feet away because he is afraid that Chet will get to it. He takes a bad shot when he could have made a layup for fear that Chet might be there. And the dude had a couple games where he had 4 and 5 blocks. So, like, he clearly had his impact. Like, Chet answered the call in this series. They challenged him in game 1, and the adjustment was, cool, we're going to let Chet do this. And he gave it to you offensively, and he gave it to you on the defensive end as well.
Like, the Thunder, I think, on their current roster could have two guys who finish, top 5 in MVP voting in their careers. I mean, Shea has already done it. He's going to be a top 3 guy in MVP voting this year. Like, that is how much I think of Chet. I mean, I think so highly of him a player. This is just the beginning. Already this incredibly efficient offensive player, already an incredible rim protector, like mobile, great competitiveness for a 7-footer. I think that's one of the most unique things about him. A lot of these big guys, they play basketball because they're tall. And I think when you have incredible competitiveness from a guy that big, it can be really special. So I think so highly of that guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of like the promise of Porzingis but with more fluidity and ball skills. And I think when we did the initial conversations about their draft class, I'm pretty sure we were reversed. Like you knew about Paolo's creation and defense at a level that I did not. And I was just watching Gonzaga games and was like, I don't think people understand about Chet. Like everybody calls him slow because he like hunches over while he moves and he doesn't look athletic. Watch his feet, watch his jumper, and the stuff he's willing to do. The dude's really, really smart. And he's just really, it's not like he is not a traditional big in any sense. Like to Willie's credit, he's like more like a wing, but he gives real elite rim protection as well, even though he's rail thin. So like we should all be terrified if he puts any meat on those bones, which who knows if he will. He might be one of these gangly dudes till the end of time and the injury issues may come one day. But right now it's yeah, they got some good stuff cooking over there.
All three of the Thunder's 25 and under studs, Chet Holmgren, and Jalen Williams, scored more points than Brandon Ingram in this series. It is as we outlined earlier. It is decision time with Brandon Ingram in the summer. You've got to give him an extension, or you're going to have to move him. You know, I asked David Griffin 2 separate questions about this topic, and I thought it was a little bit noteworthy that he basically just avoided answering it like the plague. And I get why. Like I asked like, what are your thoughts on extending him? And if you did extend him, could it be at a lower number than the max? Because the max number of years and money the Pelicans can extend him for 4 years, $208 million. It's going to be an enormous number, 30% of the salary cap. The money in the NBA is just stupid right now in general. And Griff, and I totally get why. He just basically didn't answer. He's like, look, I really admire Brandon trying to come back from injury, and I love him as a person. He's just a great guy and good teammate. And I think all of those things are true. It was admirable that Brandon Ingram tried to play. That's been a criticism of him in the past. I like that he tried to get back out there on the court with his teammates. Like, salute, hat tip. And he is a very nice person and was self-reflective after that game, talked about his struggles. I think all that stuff is true. I think this is going to be a very difficult decision this summer.
Yeah, I think there was like some acknowledgement that we were asking him to sacrifice as much as anybody to make this work this year. And I think he did all those things. And you would love if things panned out smoother or things went better. But I mean, we had a good stretch there where he committed on the defensive end and was really, really helpful. And we got even like a little glimpse of like the true ceiling of him and Zion together. But I think to the point of what Griff mentioned about like we saw enough is even though you would have liked to have seen more and you believe that maybe even there's a sliver more potential than you saw, like it's abundantly clear that there are not a lot of great ways to make it work at an elite level. I think that cat is a little out of the bag. And part of it, and it's just because of like what you would expect in terms of what they will improve on and where their games will evolve. They're not going to become like better fits fast enough in terms of their skill development because it would require them to become radically different players. So unless you can all of a sudden, like if you can have the IQ level of CJ and accept your fate and become like a masterful off-ball finisher, which is what we saw from him most of this year, it's a really tough ask. So it was nice to hear BI get like that acknowledgement at least. Like, yeah, this is a really tough year for him, but you can't say, and like negotiation in general, like if you're going to have this conversation, like can't tell us what he's going to say. Can't tell us what it's going to be like. Can't tell us that, yeah, sure, he's got the extension. I think, we're going to read between the lines and say, I think anybody, if you ask anyone around the team that's close to the team before, maybe even 3 months ago or at last trade deadline, if you ask them what player you believe like Griff probably had like the most attachment to, we might say Brandon Ingram, because like that's the guy he made a call about and was proven right to a large degree. And now like all of this talk just makes it sound like, look, we gotta think about it. We gotta do it. And if a real deal comes across the table where somebody shows that they value Brandon Ingram, we're gonna have to move on it, because there are some teams out there that have some stuff that makes sense. And if it can happen this offseason, that there's a reason that works for some teams and also for us. Like, it would be nice to make the decision now before the extension so that you're not locked in for another year if you already know it's imperfect. But it's also just the world isn't on fire if they have to go into negotiations and come up with an extension and he's a frozen asset for a year. That's not the end of the world. I don't think anybody's worried that Brandon Ingram's game is going to fall off a cliff. He's a pretty consistent player and he's not old. Nor does he have like this checkered injury history. He had a problem in the past where like these timelines would go like a little too far. Like an ankle would take an extra week and it shouldn't. So yeah, I think we heard a lot of reasonable things, and a little salute to Brandon that I think was fair. And I think even the most ardent defenders of BI are acknowledging right now that this might not be right long term.
It's been a really interesting trajectory for Brandon Ingram in New Orleans. He's been here 5 years now. That first season, it starts taking way more threes than he ever did with the Lakers. Most improved player, makes the All-Star game in Chicago. His second season is, Zion, or I'm sorry, it was Stan Van Gundy COVID, and I don't think like a situation he enjoyed very much. And like, I think
who did,
they didn't have the right fit at coach. I don't think it was like a fantastic roster around those two guys. I mean, Brandon was pretty available that season. Year 3 in New Orleans, Brandon missed quite a bit of time, but was able to get back on the court. And him and CJ really got the Pelicans to the playoffs. He shines in this first round series against the Suns. And I think at that point, I was like, man, I feel so good about this guy. Like with Zion coming back, of like the Zion BI partnership. And like, if Zion can be the guy we think he is, Brandon being the number 2. And then he has this year in his 4th year in New Orleans. It's just weird. He kicks the back of Dylan Brooks's foot, misses 29 games, what amounts to 2 months. Pelican season kind of goes down the drain without Zion and BI. BI gets back on the floor finally and plays really well down the stretch, but it's kind of too little too late, and the Pelicans losing the play-in tournament game. And then there's this year where Brandon was much more available, 64 games, his most since his days with the Lakers. And I think, as the season progressed, like did about as good of a job as he can of like being a gap filler. I just don't think that's who he is at his core, frankly. But I think everyone kind of saw, look, Zion's just the most talented player, and the best version of this Pelicans team this season was with point Zion, basically, and Brandon had to fit in around that. And I think he did a lot of good things during the regular season with that. And then, he twists his left knee and he has this playoffs. And now we're at this point. I thought he was very honest and raw after the Game 4 loss to the Thunder about the stretch with Team USA and this season up till now was the worst he's felt like he played in a Pelicans uniform. I mean, he just like emotionally was having a really tough time up there. I mean, it was like raw, honest stuff, and it kind of like took me aback almost. What did you make of him like just being very, very honest there?
Yeah, I think he shared vulnerability, and hopefully people don't take too much advantage of that. But I think FIBA was really hard. And I think it was embarrassing. And so then to have to come from that into a situation where that you're going to be sacrificing part of your role this year, like he knows that walking in the door, and you're coming out of like being like a little bit of the summer laughingstock. And now your volume metrics are all going to fall by design. And you're the guy that needs to find a way to fit. And it never really clicks. And that's not going to be on anybody else other than you. And then to have that crescendo in, we need to get you back from injury. We have to have you. Oh, by the way, now Zion's not here and the ball's back in your hands. It's just a tough run for him. And especially for a guy that plays like a very, real hoopers know style of basketball, like ball in my hands. I'm a scorer. I'm going to up fake you and go over the top of you. I'm going to spin and go over the top of you. He's on the ball a ton. And we came in and like asked him to change his identity. And I think it's proven very, very hard for him just as a thing, just as like a concept. It's really hard for him to not be that guy. And I think there's certain tools that aren't in the chest.
I think I think that's an important point. I just don't, he's very talented. He's good. He helped the Pelicans have their second most successful regular season franchise history. I do not think of him as a malleable player. And, I shared that on Twitter around Team USA time, and people did not really like that opinion at all. I mean, man, I think I got quote tweeted by multiple Ringer staffers. Yeah, they did not enjoy that one. And I got to say, I think it was a correct take. Like, I'm sorry. I really do. I just don't look at him and say, this is like an extremely adaptable basketball player. I mean, I know his time playing with LeBron was very brief and he was super young and that was not an ideal situation, but from what that very limited sample size that we saw, it did not go great. Him and Zion, it's been an okay fit at best. I just don't think, he's great at like adapting in a lot of different circumstances.
There's two things. He's not an off-ball player, like by nature. He's not an off-ball player. It's stylistically, he's never played that way. And so it's going to be really hard to shift him into that because it's teaching him concepts he's never really used, like from jump. And he's not an electric athlete. He's very long. So he has a good enough handle. He has great vision. He has the ability to be like an elite passer when the openings are there. But he can't create the openings with his dribble. So like the pathways to being like malleable or to being in a role that can constitute like a real number 2 in today's NBA, like he's only got two ways that feel realistic to me. He's got the Middleton path or he's got the 2-year DeMar DeRozan path. You either have to become an elite creator out of the post and arguably the best defender on your team, or you have to be the finisher, the unquestioned high IQ finishing shot maker, and also be a good defender. And the defense is still not that great. So he has to become one of those two things wherever he is as like a goal. But the idea that he's going to run around and play like Rip Hamilton ball or anything like that and fit around somebody, like that's not real. And I've made this point, like we've done some conversations about like his 3-point volume and why the number didn't matter to me as much as like the types of attempts they were. And he kind of made that point again when he was talking about the point guard. I just don't think he's going to shoot through contact. And I don't think he's going to have these dribble moves to get himself open. That he doesn't have them anywhere. He takes fadeaways, spins, and step backs where he dribbles forward first, gets you on your back foot, and then relocates backwards. These are not like dynamic athlete moves. They're taking advantage of his length. And when guys are willing to get up on you and push you around, it doesn't matter if you're long. So yeah, that stuff was never realistic to me. I think the two places I wanted to see him like realistically improve was when he does get those catch and shoot attempts. Even if the closeout is fairly close, you got to be willing to take the shot and you have to be willing to go up through contact sometimes. And between that and just taking a transition 3 here and there as you're coming up the floor, I think that's the real way for him to get to like 4 to 6 attempts a game. But I don't think 7 or 8 was ever like a reality. So yeah, I think we've beaten that one pretty much to death at this point.
I think one of the reasons Pelicans fans experienced a lot of frustration in the first round was you were playing a team that is younger than you and that also started their rebuild or retool around the same time that the Pelicans did. I mean, if you look at it, Pelicans had to move Anthony Davis, which rebooted this whole thing, around the same time that the Oklahoma City Thunder sent out Paul George and Russell Westbrook and rebooted what they've got going on. And I thought that Griff gave a pretty interesting answer about, basically starting their rebuilds or whatever you want to call it, reboots around the same time. Both teams being non-glamour markets, like you definitely can't say, well, Oklahoma City is benefiting from being able to sign free agents. That's not that market. I lived in Oklahoma City for 6 months after college. Um, what Griff said was the thing I think OKC did incredibly well from a fit perspective with those kids and young men to develop them in an environment where winning didn't matter for a couple of years. Our team was consistently trying to win. The development curve looked different. The trend line looked different. What did you make of that? Did you think it was valid? And if so, why was that the case that they could develop without pressure and the Pelicans had to try to win right away?
Expectations. So two like focal points. OKC gets to make for one, OKC has never not been a winner prior to their existence. So you have a satiated fan base that has already been to a finals, who has already had all world talent that was homegrown in Seattle. But you started with an embarrassment of riches. No matter what the Pelicans had in Anthony Davis, they didn't start with an embarrassment of riches. They started again with mismatches around one really great player. And when Paul George leaves OKC, like there's a like an elbow nudge and a wink wink that like, I'm not going to be an asshole about this and y'all are going to get me where I want to go. So I'm not going to trash you in the public. And the Pelicans got extorted. So they're like, how they are able to move AD is very different. So like that's one point of view. And then the other is the 2-star players. You do end up with Shea and you end up with Zion. Shea is not some all world expectations player before when he comes over from the Clippers or when he gets to the NBA or when he's at Kentucky. He was the 20th,
wasn't even a starter in college.
No, he was the 20th ranked recruit in his class. He had 4 other players starting for his team that were ranked above him. And granted, his class, like shout out to high school prospect scouts there, because 18 of the 20 were NBA players. So you weren't that far off. But he was on a Cal team where it's like the guards get watered down because the usage is spread out and all this stuff. And so like analytically, he looked like a nice player, but he didn't have this ultra high usage that made you feel super confident. Comes into the league and, he gets traded as a chief asset of like this pile of stuff deal. Well, if it was Zion Williamson at that time, you know what that deal is? Much less. You're not getting Zion Williamson and all that stuff in that same package. So like realistically, it's those expectations. Zion walks into Duke, already has million+ followers on social media. The questions are, is he just a highlight reel or can he really play? And then Duke is the number 1 team in the country all year. And he has highlight after highlight after highlight after highlight. And he's emerging more and more as the season goes on. So he walks into the league with the expectation that he's going to be great. And then as soon as he touches the ball, he's great. There isn't an upswing.
I think you hit both of the key points here. It is the Zion versus SGA factor, where SGA, was he's a lottery pick. He's regarded as a very nice young player, but nobody ever thought SGA was going to be like a top 3 in MVP voting. One of the 5 best players in the NBA until very recently. Zion had those expectations before he got drafted into the NBA. I mean, people are like, look, this guy's a potential to be the face of the NBA. And I remember during his second year, Stan Van Gundy said, this is one of the best young players we've ever had in our league. It was just different. I mean, Zion was better at 19 and 20 than Shea. And so there was expectations to win right away. And then I think you hit on the other thing. I mean, like, I think you can have a fallow period and sell that to your fan base and be okay if you just had 10 great years in a row. But I think it's a little more difficult too, because the Pelicans, they didn't have that. They're trying to build out a fan base. And it's just, so they got to hit the gas right away. And as good as Zion is and was, I mean, maybe that wasn't the best thing of like trying to hit the gas immediately. I do think it's kind of both of those things at play here. And with Zion, it's like if you get him number one overall, it's a lot easier to sell him on, hey, look, we're gonna do what San Antonio is doing with Wembanyama right now. Like this is gonna take time, and if we're patient with this, like we can really max out if you've had really good stuff to point to. Like San Antonio can look at that and say, look at all these rings. We know what we're doing. And New Orleans was just not in that situation either.
Right. You like part of this is selling it to everyone involved. And you have guys that are already, when he gets here, we have tenured dudes on the roster that have their own expectations, and you're trying to figure out what to do with Drew Holidays and JJ Redick's. So it's just a much more complicated environment for us than it was for them. Like, just plainly, that's what it is. So while it's nice to say, like, whenever you get into the nuance of these discussions and off of like the first take level of discussion, that there's just reality. Like, I find a little bit of a parallel in those kind of conversations, like Cason Wallace for OKC, incredible development year, becomes like a go-to slot in a guard spot by the end of the year. But the thing that happens that allows him to do that is the question mark on him coming into the league is his shooting. And from game one, shooting's not actually a problem. So they give him this 16 to 18 minute role as a sixth man or like first guard off the bench. And he wasn't even first guard off the bench. Like Trey Mann got some of that too. And he just took a little bite, and he got better in it. But he had all the other tools. So he had an environment and he had rational expectations. That's very different from how fans talk about Jordan Hawkins and what this team was for him. Like, there was no place for you to just slot him in because of where the gaps are. Just having a volume movement shooter, like look at Malik Beasley in every offseason of his life. He is the guy whose role gets cut. And that is Jordan Hawkins is that, but lighter right now. So it would have been tough even if it was an ideal scenario. So it's, whenever you compare any of this stuff and you really get down to the nitty gritty, there's a clear explanation. And look, salute to OKC, give them their credit. It's an awesome scenario. It's an awesome scenario for them. They have an embarrassment of riches. They have had the luxury of being able to make like cultural decisions to eliminate former lottery picks, but they don't get everything right. It's not like they just plucked all this stuff out of the sky. They get everything right. They picked Ousmane Dieng before they picked Jalen Williams. Like, they didn't know Shea was going to be this. They picked Pokashevsky and had to run him off the team. Like, they get stuff wrong too, but they gave themselves a nice safety net to build this stuff with, and then made the tough decisions before they got bad.
The COVID year, I was like one of the 20 people inside SKC. I'll never forget this Poku pass that I think dented the backboard. It's burned into my brain forever. I'm pretty sure there's like a small crack still on the backboard that Poku threw that chest pass that went 10 feet over his teammate's head. Before we wrap up, can I tell you the two funniest things that happened at exit interviews?
Oh, absolutely. Fire away.
Number one was just Matt Ryan's entire availability. Just phenomenal stuff. I mean, I asked him the first question. I was like, hey, we haven't talked to you since you got your two-way deal upgraded to a standard contract. Like, what was your reaction to that? And Matt Ryan said, about time, man. So yeah, I would say he was ready for a standard contract. Matt Ryan was also asked, what are you going to work on this offseason? He said, well, everything. And, defense, because defense is pretty tough if you have, light pigmentation. Basically saying, it's hard to play defense in the NBA if you're white. So I got to work on that part of my game, which
Uh,
was really funny, man. It was really funny. Matt Ryan is a intense, raw guy who I enjoy. I enjoy covering him.
if he'd have said work on getting his melanin up, I'd have lost it. Because that it was right there. It could have been so good. Still very funny though.
The other just I almost melted into a puddle was David Griffin. He was going out of his way to say, he said, like you guys are making too much out of so and so. This is just like last year when everybody wanted to make our issues about the medical staff. And I mean, when I tell you, I almost evaporated into a cloud. He got pressed about the medical staff last year, the Aaron Nelson's time in charge, which just an absolute disaster. Downplayed it, fired Aaron Nelson. I don't care what title they gave him. He got paid out, but they fired him. Zion plays 70 games. Brandon Ingram plays 64 games. Your best two players after 2 lost seasons because they missed so many games are on the court. You win 49 games. And you're up there saying, you guys made too much of this last year. It's like, okay.
But you also called this. You were like, watch it not even be like, it may have nothing to do with Aaron Nelson even. Like it may not actually be him. It's just that like removal of him and the need for guys to play more because of where we are in the scheme of all this. Like just changing it is probably going to make everything better, even if it wasn't like his individual practices that were the problem. But like, I mean,
yeah, I mean, some of it, absolutely. Some of it was on the players. It's fair to say that. Like Zion not being in optimal shape goes into that. And Brandon Ingram, no matter if you like the guy or not powering through minor stuff, like that's part of that's on him too. Like don't get me wrong, some of it's on the players. It just is like, dude, this is like a black mark on these last 5 years, and there's no way you can wiggle out of this. Sorry.
Like it or not, like no matter how much of the blame is or isn't on Nelson, you were the guy in charge. All of this happened. You are inextricably linked. You were here, people didn't like you, and things went bad, and you're gone, and now they got better. So yeah, clearly something is better. So yeah, that's that's funny.
Adam, this was a horrible ending to what I thought was overall a mostly fun regular season. We saw growth, genuine growth from Zion Williamson of he needed to do better after the in-season tournament. Some great moments from him, a lot of fun bench moments. This was one of the best benches in the NBA. Jose, Larry, Najee. Shout out Najee Marshall. Go get paid, brother, or do whatever makes you happy. Fun guy to cover. I think I had fun doing the show, during the season, and I'm sorry it ended that way because I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it would be nice to be talking about more rounds and like, get like the super, like all that could have changed in any world realistically is like get to a second round series is like the heights of what could have been. And we could have like ridden off of, weeks of extra weeks of adrenaline and joy, maybe a little mindfulness, but, sorry, I had to bring back the damn mindfulness, joy, and what was it? Mindfulness, joy, and competitiveness.
No, it was compassion. I'm going to be
Compassion.
practicing.
Oh, it's worse. I'm
going to be practicing a lot of
Ugh.
compassion this summer.
Please rip those down tomorrow. But anyway, so the Live, Laugh, Love Pelicans, they're in the books. And the one shame will be like, no matter how much longer Brandon's tenure goes, the possibility of what Brandon and Zion could have been if things went ideally will always be like ships passing in the night. We'll never know how it could have been if they would have been healthy and played more together and all that stuff. Like had all the rest of the crap gone better. But no matter how disappointing anything is this season, the primary objective of the year is, will Zion become the A1 professional leader of said team. And I think we're as hopeful about that as we have ever been able to be. And that is like, that's the thing. Like, the franchise is toast if he can't do that. And a lot of evidence was going the opposite way. And it finally sounds and looks like he is taking up the mantle. And I'm excited to see where that goes.
Massive offseason for Zion Williamson. Do not backslide. There was real growth, progress over these last 4 months. Keep building on it. Please keep building on it. Adam, we're going to be pumping these out once a week. Rest of the offseason, we got a Lakers draft pick. The Pelicans probably will defer the Pelicans' own draft pick. We got the draft. We got free agency. There will be trades. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about this offseason. I will talk to you again next week, brother.
Adios.